Hola, comrades! Today's topic of interest, Final Fantasy XIV. This is far from the first Final Fantasy video I've made on this channel. In fact, what number is it now? Let's count. There's my Final Fantasy VI video, which was the first time I really attempted to stretch myself with this medium. Then there was Final Fantasy XII, which I timed for the release of Zodiac Age. Then there was Final Fantasy VII. Then there was Final Fantasy X, which is my longest video to date. And that's fitting, because it's my favorite game ever made. Then there was Final Fantasy VIII, a game I loved more the more research I dedicated toward it. And that brings us to Final Fantasy XIV, which I'm doing today. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5... This is my 6th Final Fantasy video in less than a year. Wow. Though each game has its own distinct narrative and universe, the thematic similarities between the games make singling out only one for a video quite difficult. I attempt to choose one element of a game that makes it the most unique, and then focus on that. This is, with the exception of my video on Final Fantasy XII, which was about why the Zodiac Age is a good remake, and what lessons it offers for the more comprehensive remake of Final Fantasy VII, which still seems a long way from completion even almost a year later, and it doesn't look like we're going to get it anytime soon, alas. Anyway, for my actual video on Final Fantasy VII, I talked about the expanded universe around that game. For Final Fantasy VIII, I talked about romance in gaming, as that game gave us not one, but two of the greatest love stories in the history of the medium. For Final Fantasy VI, I talked about the blend of science fiction and fantasy. For Final Fantasy X, I talked about how the game is a brilliant example of how to make a world that is actually dark and soul-crushing, not just shimmering with a glossy coating of edginess. But what to talk about for 14, I wondered. It's an interesting game. When it was released, it was criticized as possibly the worst Final Fantasy game ever made. To emphasize how severe a rebuke this is, allow me to remind you that the unimaginative, soul-draining dreck that was Final Fantasy XIII had only just recently been released. 14 Vanilla was that bad. It was that glitchy. It was that devoid of content. It was a terrible replacement for the last Final Fantasy MMORPG, Final Fantasy XI, and it was bad enough that they had to retool it entirely, resulting in the far superior A Realm Reborn, which is still played to this day. It is better than 11 and one of the best MMORPGs out there. Is it one of the best Final Fantasy games ever made? No. But it did lead the way to the series renaissance of Final Fantasy XV. The third best game in the series to 6 and 10. However, let's be honest. Who am I kidding? This isn't about any of that. It's about that opening theme. Just listen to that. I didn't choose Final Fantasy XIV and then hunt for a topic. I chose Final Fantasy XIV specifically because I wanted to analyze that beautiful anthem that unloads upon you before you even begin playing. Answers. This is not my favorite song in the franchise. That honor goes to Tsutaki Dane from Final Fantasy X, which I'm so enamored with that I use it in the end slates of my videos. But it is the most ambitious song in the franchise. Clocking in at over 7 minutes long, it is this Baroque operatic prayer to an ambivalent god, asking not even for relief from suffering, but for an explanation of it. It is unlike any other song in the franchise. No, forget that. It's unlike any song from the past 100 years. This grandiose, reverent, sonorous query plays more like music from Bach or Handel than any composer alive today. It just drips with tradition and questioning spirituality. Whereas the music from those original Baroque composers was deferential to the divine, Answers challenges it. Part of that is the time period, part of it culture. Answers is modeled after the cathedral choir music of Europe during the Age of Absolutism, but that was a period where not only was religion central to everyday life, but it was heavily centralized and tied to the idea of a strong divine right monarchy. Japan, despite its layers upon layers of history and tradition, has no direct corollary. The emperor was traditionally thought to be divine, but in a culture without a direct connection to monotheism, and more specifically to a powerful centralized religious body like the Catholic Church, that does not carry the same wide-ranging cultural impact. Eastern religious traditions do tend to be more inward-looking. Also, in the 21st century, religion has declined in cultural importance, organized religion more so. Therefore, attempting to write a spiritual prayer like this, something that is both anthemic and quarrying, both borrows from and subverts traditions. I'd say it's like what you'd get if REM tried to create Handel's Messiah. But that does not accurately convey how grandiose this plea is. As is apparent right in the title, this is a prayer for answers, and it is answered by the divine, but this response does not provide the answers the mortals seek. It is not a direct response so much as it is a statement of reassurance to the questioning masses. And by reassurance, I don't mean it's going to get better, your concerns are unfounded. I mean more along the lines of keep going because it's important to the world that you do so. Your concerns are absolutely sensible, but they don't matter. There is much you have to suffer, and there is no relief I can give you. Just know that what you're doing matters. This dialogue between the mortal and the divine is fascinating, made more so by the obfuscation of the latter. Often, the divine merely repeats the queries of the masses without actually answering them. Yes, a conclusion is finally reached by the end of the song, but it is a somber and ambiguous conclusion. "Thy life is a riddle, to bear rapture and sorrow," is the opening line of the final stanza, which ends, "Thou must live, die, and know." This asserts that the knowledge the masses seek, the answers they have prayed for, will only be given in that one fleeting moment referred to thrice in the final stages. Fleeting, of course, draws parallels with Final Fantasy X's track, "A Fleeting Dream," also referred to as "Someday the Dream Will End." Both evoke the same mix of morose desperation and earnest passion, i.e., make the most of this occasion and let it envelop you because it won't last forever, and after it's gone, suffering will follow. In Answers, the suffering is overtly declared to be fatal. In this one moment, the answers that have been sought will be revealed, and the glorious rush of life will pulse and surge, but it will end, ultimately, with demise. It's an emphatic challenge handed down from above, fatalistic and grim, but weighty and substantial. The quest is not pointless, but it is mortal. This song reveres and celebrates the burden of taking on a deadly quest, one that no one could be rightfully expected to complete, but one that is of integral importance. You may remember this as exactly the kind of brave hero commits vital sacrifice for the sake of the world storyline that Final Fantasy X so brilliantly and poignantly skewered, but it works here nonetheless, because like Final Fantasy X, FF14 demonstrates an explicit understanding of how difficult the sacrifice is. The masses of mortals do not submit to the will of the divine unquestioningly, they continue to yearn for answers even as they accept their fate. This rapturous, elevated, sublime anthem is perhaps too dense for an MMORPG to back up. It raises expectations to a level that could only be met by the most profound, ambitious, spirit-lifting game. And while Final Fantasy XIV is solid, it does not rise to that level. That does not make this piece any less magical, though. It's a unique song, powerful in its spiritual solemnity, that is not maxed in the canon of not only Final Fantasy music, but video game music in general.
In the same fleeting moment, thou must live, die, and know.
The entire Final Fantasy XIV OST is surprisingly emotional and atmospheric. I recommend listening to it all. You might be surprised by how many plain great tracks there are. And while we're at it, listen to the Final Fantasy XI OST. It's pretty damn great too. The track The Cosmic Wheel is a true standout. It reminds me of Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven, honestly. Check it out for that at least. But back to answers. I first heard this before I had played Final Fantasy XIV, when I was scrolling through a list of the best 200 Final Fantasy songs. I heard so many great tracks for the first time ever. I wish I could replicate that experience. Immediately, I was struck by how ambitious Answers was. The primordial grandiosity mixed with the postmodern questioning was electrifying. I fell in love with it, and immediately downloaded it. Though it was not until last year that I discovered my all-time favorite performance of it, from the Final Fantasy orchestral concert, Distant Worlds. These guys have done a lot of great covers, including one of the best track from Final Fantasy XIII, Blinded by the Light, but this is the song that benefits most from their treatment. It needs to be performed by a luscious, full orchestra. That's what best conveys the presence necessary to the song's power. True, the Distant Worlds version surrenders the guitars, but hey, what can I say? Sacrifices needed to be made, and they were definitely worth making.
Anyway, if you liked what you saw today, consider donating to my Patreon so I can produce even more questioning content. Also, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that grandiose stuff. Adios, comrades!